Hey everybody, let's get this party started. So, today we're talking about Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. This is actually my favorite story for this entire course. It's just so interesting. And you've hopefully read it already, so you know that there's a lot of things going on, right? There's this narrator who we don't really know her name, we don't know much about her except for the fact that she tells us literally everything, but in a lot of ways, she leaves out a lot of stuff too. Does she leave them out from herself? Does she leave them out from everyone else? Who knows? Right? That's a question that we have to answer. So what I want to do is talk about perspective first, point of view. Right? Who tells this story? Well, the narrator. The narrator tells the story. She tells it in this sort of like journaling, chronicling kind of way. And so she controls the information that's presented, which is a little bit of a problem, right? Because, think about how people present information generally, right? You're telling a story, and maybe a detail changes here, an idea gets shifted so that it's a little funnier, right? So we do, alter information to fit our audience and to fit what it is that we're trying to convey, right? So we need to think about those types of things in terms of an author or in terms of a narrator. So she's unnamed throughout the story. She only refers to herself in first person, right? She refers to herself as I. She, on page 1, she talks about how John and myself, right? So that's how she identifies herself. So, we only see things from her perspective, which, could be okay. She could be biased. She could be unclear on information, facts, that sort of thing. In fact, I would definitely say that she does have a hard time identifying what is real and what is not, because we've got So she does have a hard time identifying what is real and what is not, because we see things like a woman that's hiding in the wallpaper. I don't know about you, but there's no one hiding in my wallpaper. They're just not there, right? And so the question we need to ask ourselves is, well, is the woman really there in the wallpaper for her? Is that realistic? Is she thinking that there's someone behind there shaking the bars of the wallpaper, shaking those vines, looking out through those eyes that she sees in the wallpaper? Or, is she just, falling down a path of depression and, just sort of losing it, right? We need to know as a reader, because she's the one who gives us all the information. And we can't possibly know unless we ask. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking, yeah, she's seeing some things that aren't there. So we've got that. We also see her constantly changing her position on things, right? First, she loves the house, and then she hates the room, but then she loves the room, and then she hates the wallpaper. But then it turns out she loves the wallpaper, and it just, I don't know about you, but reading this, it's just exhausting sometimes. So, we need to remember that she is not a reliable narrator. She is not someone that we can trust, which means we need to pick out the details that are important, and we need to sort of piece it together for ourselves. So even Bach identifies that she is, sort of falling into madness on page 42. Under the unerring scrutiny of the two bulbous eyes in the yellow wallpaper, the narrator passes through stages from concern to paranoia and finally to madness. Right, so she's going through this devolution from mostly sound mind to not so sound mind. So we have that. Okay. We also want to think too is that she brings us along with her, not only by discussing the information with the pages that she's writing on. So she is actively writing and sharing the information with the pages, which she identifies. Right. She talks about this early on, and then she actually even goes so far as to invoke the reader. She says on page 12, you think you have mastered it, but just as you get well underway in following, it turns a back somersault, and there you are. It slaps you in the face, knocks you down, and tramples upon you. Right? That's the wallpaper that she's talking about. First of all, wallpaper doesn't really have the ability to do a back somersault, to slap you in the face, to knock you down, or trample upon you. Second of all, she's bringing us into her delusion, right? She's saying, imagine this. This is happening to you with the wallpaper. And so, why is she doing this? Why is she looking for someone to commiserate with? Why does she invite us in when she doesn't even invite John and Jenny in? She doesn't even want them looking at the wallpaper, let alone touching it, let alone thinking about it in this abstract way. She wants this to be totally separate. So, we need to keep those things in mind. So she does that. We also know that there is a descent into madness because of the woman, right? Let's talk about the woman for a few minutes. So we see on page 10 is the first mention of this woman in the wallpaper. She says, and it is like a woman stooping down and creeping behind that pattern. I don't like it one bit. Okay, so it's like a woman stooping down. So at this point, it's not a woman, but this thing that she sees is representative of a woman. It reminds her of a woman. And so she doesn't like it. This is something foreign. This is something that doesn't make sense to her here, right? So she's saying, okay, this isn't correct. But then, on page 12, so now 2 pages later, I didn't realize for a long time that the thing that was showed behind that dim sub-pattern, but now I'm quite sure it is a woman. So it went from being like a woman to now she is like pretty darn sure that it's definitely a woman. Okay? And then, on page 15, another 3 pages in, the front pattern does move, and no wonder, the woman behind shakes it. Sometimes I think there are a great many women behind, and sometimes only one, and she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over. Then in the very bright spots, she keeps still, and in the very shady spots, she just takes a hold of the bars and shakes them hard, and she is all the time trying to climb through. Okay, so not only is she like a woman, then she is quite sure that she is a woman. And then she is so actively engaged, this woman in the wallpaper, that she literally moves it. Okay? So this sort of change in the view of who this woman is and what she can interact with is kind of interesting. It's kind of scary if you're thinking of her as like a person, right? If you're imagining this character as someone that you know, well, this is alarming. Okay? And then we see her talking about how the woman now gets out in the daytime. The narrator's seen her, right? And that's page 15 as well. And then the next page, on page 16, she says, I don't want anybody to get that woman out at night but myself. So not only does she feel like she's the only one who sees her, right? Because she is. But also she wants to have some sort of control over the woman's escape. So we see that. And then, as soon as it was moonlight and that poor thing began to crawl and shake the pattern, I got up and ran to help her. So not only is she seeing the woman now completely, she believes that she's there, but she actually goes up to help the woman get out of the wallpaper, which is pretty interesting, right? So this sort of change in perspective as we go along is definitely alarming. It's definitely something that the reader needs to be aware of. Is this actually happening? No, probably not, right? This isn't meant to be this like fantasy story. Right, this is a story about a woman who is who's depressed, right? She has postpartum depression. And so she's sort of devolving into madness because of this cure that was, prescribed for her by her husband. So we see that. We see how the woman changes. But then we also see some other things, right? We see how she's interacting with the wallpaper. And we see that from the beginning, she's actually interacting with the wallpaper. If you remember, right towards the beginning, page 3, she comes into the room and she sees that it's like the first or second day, that the paper's stripped off in great patches all around the head of her bed, about as far as she can reach, and in a great place on the other side of the room, low down. Right, so someone's been pulling off this wallpaper, and she's just sitting there like, I don't know who's been doing this. I don't know why they've been doing this, but it's happening. Right, then later we find out that there's a very funny mark on this wall, low down near the mopboard, a streak that runs around the room. It goes behind every piece of furniture except the bed, which, remember, the bed's nailed down, so you can't go behind the bed. A long, straight, even smooch, as if it had been rubbed over and over. I wonder how it was done and who did it and what they did it for. Round and round and round, round and round and round. It makes me dizzy. I don't know about you, but that quotation makes me a little dizzy. So right? We see that there's this funny mark, okay? And then later on we find that, the narrator is pulling the wallpaper as the woman in the wallpaper shook. So I shook and she pulled, and before morning we'd peeled off yards of that paper, a strip about as high as my head and around the wall, so I cannot lose my way. Right? So she, from the quotation on page 3, is actually the one who's been tearing this wallpaper apart. She just doesn't realize. Okay? Perhaps this is why Bach starts talking about how she was, chained up on the rings that are in the nursery, right? Perhaps. So we see that, and then in regards to the smooch, she talks about how she can creep smoothly on the floor, and her shoulder fits or just fits in that long smooch around the wall, so close. Oh, so I cannot lose my way. That smooch was made by her. Okay, so her timeline, as far as what she's telling us, is off. Okay, things are happening without her understanding, or without her being able to identify that it's happening. Okay, so she also interacts with the bed, right? We find out some stuff. Okay, we know that the bedstead is fairly gnawed. Okay, that might have been a weird thing for her to say initially, right? Because she just sort of comes out with this on page 18. But then we also find out just a couple lines later, this bed will not move. She's getting mad at this bed. She can't get the wallpaper off because the bed won't move. She needs to help get this woman out. The bed will not move. I tried to lift and push it until I was lame, and then I got so angry I bit off a piece at one corner. What? I don't know about you, but when I get mad, I don't bite my bed. I'm just saying, just putting it out there. So she's biting this bed. She's making smooches in the wallpaper. And then she actually becomes the woman in the wallpaper, right? I don't know about you, again, but we imagine things as humans. It's what we do. We think about, oh, well, could you imagine being an actor? Right? Oh, let's think about it. Oh, that'd be so fun. Oh, no, that would be awful. Right? And you go back and forth. But she actually believes she's become the woman. Right? Initially, she loves to look out the windows. She thinks it's great. It's the best way for her to enjoy the space. Okay? But then on page 18, we know that she doesn't like to look out the windows anymore. There's so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they all come out of the wallpaper as I did. As I did? Interesting. Right? And then later on she says, I suppose I shall have to get back behind the pattern when it comes night, and that is hard. Right? So she goes back into hiding. And then, I've gone out at last, said I, in spite of you and Jane, and I've pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. So, who's Jane? Right? That's an important question. She's this person now, the woman in the wallpaper, I guess embodied by the narrator, is the narrator? It's hard to say, right? I would imagine yes. Bach indicates yes. On page 44, Jane here is arguably herself, estranged now not only from John, but from her own identity as well. So we know, that she's just sort of gone off the rails a little bit at this point, right? She is someone who is, just sort of devolving. So, furthermore, right, she's this woman in the wallpaper. She's walking around the wallpaper, making that smooch along the floor, okay? And then John comes in after she sends him on this wild goose chase to go find the key that she threw out the window that's under the plantain leaf by the front door, right? All of that happened. And then John comes inside. He gets into the room finally and sees her and faints. He faints just because of what she's doing. And she says, now, why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time. So John, the man who has been caring for her, the man who has been controlling her life for the last 3 months, right, because they only had a 3-month rental, they're about to leave the next day, John is fainted. He's fainted And instead of her taking care of him and seeing if he's okay, she's like, nah, John, you stay down there. And continues to walk around the edge of the room, right? That's strange. That is so weird. But we have to remember that strange and weird are relative terms, okay? Strange and weird to me and you, to this narrator, was very much her reality, okay? So we need to think about things like that. Okay, Bach at that point says, this woman in the wallpaper is presumably her doppelganger or a manifestation of her psychosis, who shakes the bars just as if she wanted to get out, is invariably from the narrator herself, and she becomes this woman to free herself, if only in the mind, from the external prison her husband places her in. Right? Throughout this story, Bach is identifying the panopticon. He's talking about how the wallpaper becomes the observer and she becomes the constantly observed, right? And how that damages a person's psychological perspective. So he's saying that Jane becomes the woman in the wallpaper to escape from that psychological torture, okay? John locks her in the room, so the room is watching her. Doubly, John and Jenny are also watching her. So she needs to figure out how to get away from that space as well as get away from that wallpaper, right? Those are two different things for her. Because remember, she kind of likes the room and then she hates the room. But then she hates the wallpaper and then loves the wallpaper and becomes possessive of the wallpaper, right? So her perspectives on these things have shifted. But the thing that hasn't shifted is that she had been controlled by her husband, who was also her doctor, right, which complicates things. And then we also know that, she's controlled by Jenny. Jenny is helping John keep her locked away. Sure, Jenny's more lax. She lets the narrator do what she wants to when she wants to do it. But Jenny is still a reporter for John, essentially, right? We find out that the narrator heard John ask Jenny a lot of professional questions about her. She had a very good report to give, right? So John's asking Jenny questions about things that happened while he was at work. Jenny is answering them, and depending on what she says, the narrator's like, oh, cool, that's nice, or, oh, I don't really like the things that she said. In this case, it was good, right? So the perspective of this narrator is skewed. We need to question a lot of things. We need to question, okay, why is she telling us this story? Okay, what is the purpose? Is it so that we can watch her devolve? Is it so that we can watch, this episodic series? Is it just to get it out of her head, right? What is happening here? Okay, we also need to ask, how is she biased? Is she biased against John? She starts out thinking, okay, well, I don't like what John is doing, right? He's kind of annoying me. He's controlling everything. But then by the end, he denies her multiple times. It's something like 15 times. She requests things and he says no, and no, and no, and no. And finally, she gets to the point where she just starts being deceptive. She starts hiding things from him. And, that isn't something that she was doing beforehand. So she's changing in order to get away from this control of John, this control of Jenny as an extension of John, and then a control free from the control of the wallpaper, because she sees it as part of her prison, part of the space that's keeping her locked away, right? In fact, Bach talks about how the home itself is very much a prison, because she, on her way in, confronts external instruments of restraint suggestive of a prison or a mental ward. On the outside, she passes through a series of gates and locked doors before arriving at her room. The hedges and walls of the grounds, the locked front gates of the path, the gate at the head of the stairs outside her room, and the locked door to the nursery. Once inside, she's further confronted by objects of restraint. The rings and things in the walls, which she assures us were used by the children in their playroom and gymnasium, but we later realize were used instead to secure her, the pinioned bedstead, and the windows barred for little children. Right, that's on page 43. So we know that Bach is talking about how the narrator is sort of placed inside a prison, and she's placed inside a prison inside that. right? The wallpaper is constantly observing her, so she is locked in that psychological prison. And then as an outward expansion of that, the whole estate that they rent becomes her other prison. Okay, so we know that she's feeling oppressed. We know that she's feeling, tied down. She can't make herself better because she doesn't have the capacity to. So we need to consider, why is she telling us this? Is this a cry for help? Is this just a way to get ideas down? Right, like I said before. So I wanted to just talk about those things. I wanted to talk specifically about point of view in this video. So I hope that you enjoyed the Yellow Wallpaper. Like I said earlier, it's one of my absolute favorites. I think it's a lot of fun, it's very interesting, and it makes us question a lot of things about the narrator. So bring that ability to question through to other stories, right? Always ask questions. It's the most important part of reading. You won't figure anything out unless you ask questions of the text. Don't assume it's going to tell you everything, because it won't. Just like this, it will not tell you. You have to find it. Okay, that's really, really important. All right, so thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and you will get another video from me soon.